I think they can see you. Yeah, okay, all right. You be a good girl. You were an utter distraction 2 weeks ago. All right, welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the weekly garden question and answer video that I do most weeks. The first Sunday of each month, I do a subscriber Sunday video where subscribers send in photos. I'll talk more about that later in the month for the October version of that. But this week will be a question and answer video. Most of these garden questions were asked a couple weeks ago, the last time I did a question and answer video. I think I'm gonna upload this on Saturday instead of my normal Sunday this week. The video that'll go up on Sunday will be the Lycoris video that I shot with Tony Avent over at Juniper Level Botanic Garden and Plant Delights Nursery. I haven't edited that video yet. This one's a little easier to edit, so I think I'm just gonna reverse them, give myself a little more time to get that other video up. The seed, let's see. The vegetable seed that went in a video a few weeks back looks absolutely fantastic. This lettuce looks so good already. That'll be going in the ground this week. All of the trays are up and looking good, so there'll be some sort of fall vegetable planting video going up. Holly's laying in front of my feet. You won't be able to see her now. There was a bonsai video that went up earlier this week. If you haven't watched that video has less views than normal on the channel, so I'm guessing people are reading the title as bonsai. They're not interested in bonsai, so you're not watching, which is totally understandable. I think that you will enjoy that video regardless if you haven't watched it. There's a great story at the end about one of the bonsais that's in the gentleman's collection. It's a person in my neighborhood who has an incredible collection. Milos was great on camera. I think you'll enjoy the video. You don't have to be interested in bonsai to enjoy that video. So anyway, I'm just throwing that out there. If you haven't clicked on it for that reason, I think it's still, it was one of my favorite videos that I've done. So anyway, a couple videos went up on the garden plants with Jim Putnam channel this week. So you're watching the HortTube with Jim Putnam channel. There's a garden plants with Jim Putnam channel. I think there's 4,400 subscribers over there already, and there's only like 10 videos or something. So thank you guys for subscribing and following along with that. That channel is just going to be individual plant videos. Lots of them coming. I have an editor for that now, and we're going to be shooting lots more of them in the next few weeks. And I think they'll be more informative as we go. I'm going to add more to. There's a little clicker. There's a little thing at the end of every video with a lot of the description of the plants on that little thing that you can take a photo or something of you know. It's basically like a plant tag we're trying to create for each of the plants that are covered on that channel. There you go. Let me see. Went to the dermatologist this week, and I always, my yearly dermatologist appointment. I got out clean for the first time. I left with all my own blood for the first time in years. So wear sunscreen when you're gardening. I always like to throw that out there. It always reminds me to say that, every year when I go. And next week's question and answer stuff is going to be included in the question and answer video. So all of your, Stephanie's been in a lot of the weekly tour videos, if you've seen her in them. She has a degree in landscape design. And so if you have questions, whatever gardening questions you have next week, she'll be participating in answering them with me. And I think that's it. Let's get to some gardening questions that you guys asked a couple weeks ago. Somebody asked me my opinion of Biochar fertilizer. That fertilizer's some sort of carbon that they mix with fertilizer, and it creates a slow release fertilizer that can get added. I think for the most part it's just completely, it's unnecessary to. I'm just doing a once a year organic fertilizer. The fertilizing I did here was done in February. Nothing that's around me, nothing that you're seeing in these videos has had any additional fertilizer. I'm just building the soil and letting, again, I say this I say this over and over and over again. Build your soil, let your soil take care of your plants. That biochar fertilizer, I love how they advertise it. We didn't invent something. The Amazonians were using this, thousands of years or something like that. There's very, very poor soils in the Amazon. And there's now very, very poor soils, unfortunately, in a lot of our farms because we've mismanaged our soil on our farms. And so there are places where you have to have inputs, additional fertilizer inputs. That includes containers, because containers don't have soil. So there are places where, whether it's the biochar fertilizer or any other slow release fertilizer, that it's necessary for people to fertilize, honestly, just because we've mismanaged soil, or you start with very poor soil, like in the Amazon where they get a ton of rain. Despite how lush the Amazon is, it's actually very poor soils, very little nutrient dense soil in the Amazon because of the amount of rain that they get. Literally leaches the fertilizer and nutrients out of the ground. So but for most everybody watching me, is if you'll just, compost what you have, don't let organic material leave your property, mulch your leaves, mulch your sticks, mulch everything that you're taking out and putting back, and feed the soil that way, the way, nature just kind of does it on its own. You don't need any of these other inputs. You don't need anybody out there trying to sell you anything. And it's not me knocking that particular fertilizer. It's me knocking all types of fertilizers for the most part. For the most part, most of it is unnecessary. And I'm fertilizing once a year, almost just to tell you guys how little I'm fertilizing. And I'm using like a half rate when I do. So there you go. Let's see. Somebody had their pink, somebody said they wouldn't name who it was. I'm guessing a spouse or something mowed down their pink mully grass, and they're in zone 7B, wanted to know if it would come back. It's obviously not the best time to be cutting your ornamental grasses back in the late summer. It depends on how established they were. If they were little 1 gallons that just went in the ground like a few months ago and they got mowed down, they may have trouble through the winter, and rot. But if they were well-established plants, they'll likely come back. And that's true with almost everything. Plants are so resilient once they've been in the ground for some period of time. You can really, it's amazing to me how much, how much they'll take. I had a dogwood back at the old house, and I had to, the trunk was this big around on it. I had to cut it down because it was leaning over something else. And I hit it with a chainsaw, about this tall. And it was one of the most beautiful trees in the landscape after 10 years later. It was like something you think I've definitely killed it, right? I've cut a tree down that's this big around down to about 4 feet tall, grew right back. So things are really resilient after they've had time in the ground. They're more heat tolerant, more drought tolerant, everything. They're tolerant of everything. Let's see, somebody saw a hydrangea. They went up to Mackinac Island, and they saw a hydrangea called Great Star, and can't find it anywhere to purchase it. That is a very good Hydrangea paniculata. It's been around for, I don't know, a couple decades now, probably almost. The actual problem with you not being able to find a very specific Hydrangea paniculata is because every plant brand is introducing so many of them every year. And so for growers out there, I don't even know what they're supposed to do. They have the opportunity, and they have salespeople coming in, every year with the latest and the greatest Hydrangea paniculatas or macrophyllus or, mountain hydrangea or, Hydrangea serrata. Doesn't really matter what it is. Hydrangea arborescens, Hydrangea quercifolia. There's salespeople coming into the office showing them, here's the latest and the greatest. And I think growers are probably just have no idea which ones they should be growing, which one people are really gonna like. Limelight's been the king, of Hydrangea paniculatas for its entire patent life, and it's at the end of its patent at this point. And there's so many new ones that have come out. I have White Wedding here in this landscape, which is just that's a fantastic plant. And so I think that's what you're seeing more than anything when you're looking for a particular hydrangea that's been around for more than a decade or two. It's maybe hard to find them unless you're finding a place that just specializes in interesting hydrangeas. But even them, they all like the free advertising. So you got YouTubers out there, and magazines and everybody else promoting the latest and the greatest ones, and not mentioning the fact that we had really good ones before. And that's true with a lot of different plants. And so that's a lot of what's going on. If you're a grower, you need to sell what you grow, obviously. And so if I grow one called Great Star and people see it in the store, are they going to buy it, or are they going to buy the one in the, the white pot or the brown pot or the yellow pot, and with the tag on it, and the one they saw in the magazine? So that's a lot of what we're seeing there. I know someone who's now collecting all the old Azalea varieties, because a lot of the nurseries are growing almost 100% repeat blooming azaleas. And so who would have ever thought that our old standby azalea varieties could actually be, threatened, to not be able to find them anywhere going forward in the future, because none of the growers are growing them, or they're growing very few, of the old varieties now. Okay, somebody is in zone 6B. They have an unheated greenhouse and wanted to put a few evergreens in there for the winter. So they have something, something happening in there. I think your issue, one thing about, growing things in a greenhouse, especially in like an unheated greenhouse. I had an unheated greenhouse at my nursery, but it was very, very large. And so the heat it collected during the day did not dissipate out of it very quickly during the night. It did get cold in there at night, but it would never drop down to the outside temperature because it had so much volume of warm air, and the ground itself was warming up, and that was releasing during the night. And all my plants were down near the floor. So you can imagine, if I can heat the floor up during the day, how much heat I can reserve. But if you have a tiny little backyard greenhouse, it's just going to drop almost to the temperature it is outside at night. Maybe not quite, but it's going to drop pretty close. And so anything you had in a container would need to be, zone 4 or zone 5 hardy. So probably conifers like junipers, or any kind of conifer that needs to be like zone 4, zone 5 hardy, and assume. What you would probably want to do is open the door during the day so it doesn't actually warm up all that much during the day. And that way they're not trying to grow. But that would be my recommendation, would be to open it up during the day, and then, unless you're out there sitting and you're trying to, gain some heat while you're sitting. But otherwise, I'd leave it open and treat it as if it's the outdoors. Because if it does warm up during the day, it has the potential to try to put on a little bit of growth, and the plant think it's the spring. But at night, the temperature is going to drop. You don't have a lot of stored energy in a very small backyard greenhouse that's unheated. And you need heat in one when they're that small. Okay, let's see. Somebody asked me if it was worth the trouble to make compost tea. I guess if you're fertilizing container plants, which I just talked about a few minutes ago, you normally don't have any rock dust in the soil mixes that are in your containers with a lot of mineral content, reserve mineral content. So if you have ongoing fertilizing in your containers, it might be worth making compost tea. But for things in the ground, I can't imagine why you wouldn't just cover the ground in the compost. And, the tea would just be made by, raining on it, and, the plants rooting up into it, that kind of thing. So it seems, outside of watering containers, I can't imagine why I would make compost tea. Somebody may have some other opinion, of that. But I just use the compost. Compost air. Okay, somebody wanted to just talk about how I'm composting things. I'm actually cold composting, which just means that I'm not heating it up and letting it get hot. Most everything that's piled up back here is, I can just flip the top stuff off and scoop up the stuff down at the bottom that's broken down enough to spread out into the garden. But I am not thus far heating up my compost. So the only thing that can go in there is stuff that's not diseased, doesn't have insects. But thus far it's just literally a pile of stuff. You can just pile stuff on top of itself and it will break down slowly. But I just kind of call that cold composting, as opposed to heating it, allowing it to heat up. It's a little too shady back there, really. I need to get it in a little more sunlight. I'm gonna do something else with it when I build it. Originally, I was going to build it into the back fence back there, but I think I'm going to put it somewhere else where I can get some heat built up on it, and break stuff down with some heat. but I'll do that later. But literally right now, I'm pretty much cold composting everything here. If it's something that I cut off, prune back, that's small, it just gets thrown on the ground right under the plant. If it's a little more chunky than that, it goes on that compost pile. If it's even more chunky than that, it's in another pile over here that I'm gonna run through a chipper and turn into mulch. And so that's the way I'm dealing with organic material right here in this garden right now. So nothing is leaving. Leaves will land on the ground and just stay where they are. And then I'm just kind of, if it's something small that's not diseased or whatever, it just goes right back into the bed immediately. Just throw it right under the plant. Nobody can see it down there. It'll break down. It's mulch. And then again, as it sizes up, I'm deciding what to do with it. Okay. Somebody asked about seed collecting. Should they just leave the flowers on the plant to form the seeds, or can they get them off the cut flowers? I would leave some of the flowers on the plant and let them form the seeds on the plant. I don't think you may get some viable seed taking the cut flower in the house. The problem is though, it's not necessarily been pollinated. So the plant, the flower has to be pollinated. So if I took a flower bud, and I cut it before it opened, like on a dahlia or something, and then I took that in the house and I let it open in the house, I mean, nothing's going to pollinate it. So, it can't really form a seed that's viable. So the answer is leave some portion of your flowers on your plants if you want to get the seed later in the season. And some will form seed, throughout the entire season, and then some just, toward the end will make the best seed that they're going to make. But I keep some okra on here that I let decline, and I collect that seed later. And dahlia's the same thing. I can collect dahlia seed pretty much all season. Once the flowers fade down, I could probably go over there and get jars of it, right now. But it needs to come off the plant just to make sure it got pollinated. Okay. So somebody planted some Abelia in Texas. I don't think Texas really matters here right this minute. They planted them in mid-May. One of them is has slightly smaller leaves and looks more stressed than the others. Again, I say this all the time. It's the first year they're in the ground. So I don't think you can judge things based on what something looks like its first year in the ground. I don't think you can judge the color of the foliage. I don't think you can the amount of flowering, the size of the leaves, how much growth it has, how little growth it has, how much you're having to water it more than other things, the one that's sitting next to it, they were all individual plants, possibly grown at different nurseries, and one spot in your garden to another 6 or 10 feet away could be very different soil, drained very differently. One could be more root bound than the other when it went in the ground. And so that variability goes away again as plants become more established. So I just like to stress that occasionally. Don't judge things based on their first season in the ground. Okay, somebody has some swamp milkweed and they got black foliage and they're defoliating. I'm guessing that's sooty mold. Most of the milkweed gets that oleander aphids. There's little yellow aphids along there. They actually get there's a lot of milkweed specific pests, which are, again, for me, it's kind of interesting. That not only is milkweed the host plant for the monarch butterfly caterpillar, it's also the host plant for a ton of different insects and funny things. But the oleander aphid gets on that milkweed, and then it secretes sugary substance that's where you get that black mold on, and so that's probably what it was. Those aphids can be different year to year, and so I had even plant to plant in your same landscape. So my Asclepias tuberosa back here did not have any of the aphids this year. The one out by the fence did, and it kind of defoliated. It has a little bit of that black foliage on it. Has no chance of having a monarch on it. These back here seem healthy enough that it's late in the season at this point, but I was hoping I would see them. It seems year to year, to be a little different. Be careful not to over fertilize your milkweed or anything, again, with this fertilizer thing, because pushing lots of new growth, that tender new foliage is really where the aphids want to be. And so the more you potentially you think you're doing the plant good, can make them more vulnerable to the aphids. But again, that's likely what it is. Again, kind of an interesting little thing, interesting little tidbit. Let's see. Oh, so somebody has their oak leaves. They do try to keep them in their landscape. They're mowing, even if they mow them, they're not breaking down in the beds as fast as they think they should be breaking down. You may just have too much material. I've got this giant oak back here, and it does, when it drops the leaves, they do get a little bit too thick back toward the back. Those I will spread out either in the rest of the garden or put them on the compost pile, or just pile them up somewhere. There's a limit to how much material you'd want to to be building up. So if it's not breaking down quick enough, it may just be too much material. You may be able to pull some to the side in bags or in a pile, and then use it again later after some of the if you put 3 or 4 inches of that material down from the lawnmower, and then just put the rest to the side and use it again later. It's like reserve mulch or something. Somebody says, am I afraid of snakes? And do I have them? No, I'm not afraid of snakes. The only thing that makes me a bit weird with snakes now is just the amount of copperheads we had. And I don't know if I've had this conversation in one of these Q&As before, but people are so murderous with snakes that all the snakes that could be seen, not all the snakes, but lots of the snakes that are easily seen, if people kill snakes that they run across, the one snake that's the most camouflaged seems to have won, which is the copperhead. And so we have way, way too many, a disproportionate number of copperheads. When I was a kid growing up here in the Raleigh area, I mean, we would never see copperheads. I mean, we saw 1 or 2 as like an event. And now, almost all the snakes I would see in Johnston County were, around the nursery were a couple different water snakes we had there, but it was mostly copperheads. It's amazing how many copperheads there are. And I think it's because of some of the, like our eastern king snake, which is a black snake that has little bands on it, eats copperheads, eats other snakes. They got killed. I only saw 1 eastern king snake in the 23 years I lived in Johnston County. It was right before I was moving out of the house. I was like, where have you been? Where have you been this whole time? I wanted one of you. So, to know I'm not scared of snakes, but it is kind of strange now that if you do run across a snake here in my area, it tends to be, a poisonous snake, unfortunately. But no, this neighborhood, I don't know, they were particularly murderous in this neighborhood in the last 90 years. And then I've seen a couple little worm snakes, but that's it. There's basically no snakes in this neighborhood. There's a rare report, of somebody seeing a copperhead. Of course, it's a copperhead when they do see one, but no, it's people have been particularly murderous of them here. But no, I'm not as scared of them, and I like them. Had a boa constrictor for years as a pet when I was younger. Somebody asked me my opinion of an American pillar arborvitae. I don't know where you live, but one thing that's probably worth talking about is Thuja occidentalis, which is our eastern arborvitae. This is some people call them white cedars. If you actually look at the native range of that plant, it's north of Pennsylvania up into Canada, and then a little bit through Appalachia. So when you're shopping and you're looking at emerald arborvitae, globe arborvitae, DeGroote's arborvitae, this American pillar arborvitae, these are eastern arborvitaes, and everybody's planting them down here in zone 7B. It's stressful right out of the gate. You want to know why you get insect and disease problems and decline. It's because that plant is native to hundreds of miles north of where they're going in the ground here. Doesn't mean they all do poorly, but I see lots of them doing very poorly in this area. But who can resist a little emerald arborvitae or American pillar arborvitae? Who can resist them? They're just perfect little soft to the touch evergreens, and I see why people buy them. I see why people sell them. I see why people grow them. but we are well out of its native range to the south, and you know, it's hotter than it was, and it's hundreds of miles south. So my opinion is if you live way further north, great choice. If you live down here in the south, there are probably better conifers, and probably Japanese cedars like cryptomeria or juniper selections that are upright and narrow are probably better choices for the south. Okay, somebody said if they pull their weeds that have seed heads on them and throw them in their compost, are you going to get those seeds coming up in your beds later? Depends on, again, I go back to, I'm cold composting back here, which just means I'm letting things break down the material and then I'm using it without it ever heating up. Definitely weed seeds going to be spread that way. So I would not be throwing weedy things on my cold compost pile. If your compost gets very hot, that's what will take care of those seed issues. So that's really the question at the end of the day, is does your compost pile get very hot? Other than a few chemicals, most things will not make it through super hot compost. So that's the way to judge that. I would not go through that cold compost process that I have with weed seed in it. Okay, somebody's got an old azalea. It was their grandmother's. They want to transplant it, and they're going to root prune it, which is something I've talked about in the past. You can prune it in place, you know, cut the roots in place, leave it there for a little while, and then transplant it. They want to know how far out to go. As wide as you think you can carry that plant later. Keep in mind, azaleas have very shallow fibrous root system. Okay, so you're going to get the wider the better, but keep in mind there's not really a tap root on them. You know, it'll get a little deeper right under the plant, but for the most part, you're going to have this like pancake type root system. So you want to get as much of that as possible. So if you can go out to the drip line, and then you'll be digging. You won't actually be digging very deep to move an azalea. They're kind of interesting that way. It's a super fibrous root system that's mostly up near the top of the soil. So as wide as you think you'll be able to carry it. So what I would do is root prune it, you know, wait until it's cooler, and then go underneath it, you know, like I showed on how to transplant or remove an old shrub video that's on the channel. And then have a tarp next to it that you can just slide it onto that tarp and then drag it to wherever you want it to go at that point. But just slide it right up onto a tarp. But it'll be a narrow pancake. Azaleas are interesting to move. Okay, then so the last question is it legal to propagate patented plants? And this is a question that's shown up a lot over the years, and I don't normally answer it because people have all kinds of opinions about this. Unfortunately, the law doesn't care. The law doesn't care about opinions. It is actually illegal to propagate. See, this became, well, I can propagate them for myself. I can root them for myself, and then that rumor takes off. Is that, you know, well, if you're doing it for yourself and you're not doing it for profit, then it's okay. It's actually illegal regardless. You're not supposed to take cuttings off patented plants regardless of their use without permission from the owner of the patent. Patents only last 20 years. And so you end up in arguments with people about, it's a living thing, nobody should be able to own it. Well, this person spent 30 years of their life, you know, working on this, and they would have never put the time or energy into it if they had not seen it, some sort of ability to possibly profit from it, you know, at the end of a 20, 30-year process. So I've never minded, you know, patented plants. Some of the trademarking, you know, I do have, you know, an issue with the naming. You know, we're trademarking the names, so they can't. When after the patent ends, you can't call it that anymore because somebody owns the name. So, you know, that I have more of an issue with than the actual. But it's only 20 years that somebody owns this thing. A lot of times it's 3 or 4 years into the patent before the numbers are even built up on them. So they only have, you know, 15, 16 years to actually make, you know, money off of this thing that they literally put their life into. And so, you know, it's illegal to propagate patented plants. Definitely don't want to go out and sell them because that's when they'll probably pursue you. But they're not going to pursue any backyard gardeners in all likelihood for rooting a few extra for yourself. But technically, technically it is illegal to do it without permission from the owner. Again, it's one of those things I just don't mind. I love the fact that people are working on, you know, these things, and there's new and interesting things coming out. And if we said tomorrow, it's a living thing, so everybody should be able to do whatever they want to with it, you would literally see the end. Except for a few people would continue just as backyard hobbies of introducing new plants. But the really force of it moving forward that we've seen in the last 2 or 3 decades of new and interesting things coming out would just be like, it would just end very, very quickly. So one of those controversial topics in this business that, you know, I support somebody's ability to, you know, make a profit off of something they put their life into, and it's a very short window that they actually own that patent you know, and there's a hummingbird on the salvia. So thank you guys for following along with these question and answer videos. I'm not going to call it a Sunday question and answer video because you're going to see it on Saturday. And ask questions down below and I'll pick from those for next week's video. Thanks for watching.